Welcome to the Behavior Code. I'm Maria.
And I'm Gabriel. And we're going to start today's episode, This Is Not Obvious, with a pretty bold statement. Ready for it, Maria?
I am so ready. Let's do it.
All right, here it is. Most of what you believe about success, about relationships, and even about other people is probably wrong.
It's a big one, and it sounds, a little intense, but what we mean is that the most powerful truths are often hidden in plain sight. They feel like they should be obvious, but our brains are wired to ignore them.
Exactly. And today we're going on a deep dive to uncover some of these non-obvious truths. We're going to look at why consistency beats talent, but we still bet on talent. Exactly. It's not about intelligence. In fact, sometimes being smart makes it even harder to see what's right in front of you. Our minds build these incredibly complex shortcuts to navigate the world. But in the process, they wallpaper over the simple foundational truths that actually govern our lives.
We're also going to talk about relationships and why we sometimes chase people who pull away, even when we know it's a bad idea.
Oh, that's a classic. And finally, we'll hit on money, specifically why our culture is obsessed with penny pinching and saving, but often terrified of the thing that actually builds wealth, earning more. So stick around because what you're about to hear is not obvious.
So, Gabriel, let's start with this whole idea of obviousness. Why do we fall into this trap of thinking we already know the answers? And the reason it's not obvious is because our brains are actively working against us, creating mental shortcuts and biases that make the simple truths incredibly hard to see.
It really comes down to a super common cognitive bias, one that's working on us all the time. It's called hindsight bias.
Right, the I knew it all along effect.
That's the one. After an event happens, our brain kind of rewrites history. It makes the outcome feel like it was predictable, like it was inevitable. Think about the 2008 financial crisis. Afterwards, everyone was like, of course the housing bubble was going to burst. All the signs were there.
Yeah, but before it happened, only a handful of people were actually sounding the alarm, and most of them were dismissed as being, crazy.
Precisely. Hindsight bias smooths over the uncertainty that existed before the event. It makes the world seem more orderly and predictable than it actually is.
And that's so dangerous because if we think all the important answers are already obvious, we stop looking for them. We stop being curious.
We stop being curious. That's the key. You see a successful company like, say, Airbnb, and you think, well, of course, people have spare rooms, travelers need places to stay. It's obvious. But you forget the part where the founders were selling cereal boxes to stay afloat, and everyone thought the idea of sleeping in a stranger's house was insane. And this isn't just about big world events. It happens in our own lives constantly. You look back at a past relationship and think, all the red flags were there. How did I miss them? But at the time, you were just living it, moment to moment. The red flags were just life. Hindsight connects the dots into a story, but it's a story you can only write after you know the ending.
Totally. The success makes the idea seem obvious in retrospect, but the path to it was anything but. So, this illusion of obviousness is a major roadblock. But there's another layer to this, right? It's not just hindsight bias. Sometimes, especially smart people seem to be the most blind to simple truths. That example is perfect because it highlights the core of the illusion. We mistake the final, polished product for the entire journey. We see the mansion, but we don't see the years of laying bricks in the rain.
Yes, and this is fascinating. Why do people with high IQs or, impressive credentials often overcomplicate things and miss the simple, effective solution right in front of them?
I think a big part of it is overthinking. When you're used to solving complex problems, you build this mental toolkit for complexity. So when you face a simple problem, you still pull out the same complex tools. You're looking for hidden variables and intricate patterns because that's what your brain is trained to do.
Right, it's like trying to open a can with a laser beam when a simple can opener would do the job. Another huge factor is something called the curse of knowledge. When you know something inside and out, it becomes incredibly difficult to imagine what it's like not to know it. Your brain has compressed that knowledge so efficiently that you can't uncompress it and explain it simply anymore.
Exactly. And then there's ego. This one is huge. Admitting that the answer is simple can feel, well, almost insulting. If the solution to your big important problem is get more sleep or communicate more clearly, it doesn't feel sophisticated. It doesn't validate your intelligence.
It's like the classic story of the NASA engineers who spent millions developing a pen that could write in zero gravity, while the Russian cosmonauts just used a pencil. The story might be an urban legend, but the lesson is real. The smartest people in the room often jump straight to the most complex solution, because their intelligence is a hammer and every problem looks like a nail. There's a saying in medicine: when you hear hoofbeats, think of horses, not zebras. But smart people, experts, they love to hunt for zebras. It's more exciting, it proves their expertise. A doctor gets more professional satisfaction from diagnosing a rare disease than telling their 10th patient that week to drink more water and get more sleep. That makes so much sense. We want to believe our problems are unique and complex because that makes us feel unique and complex. A simple solution implies a simple problem, which we don't want to have.
And the third piece, I think, is social conditioning. We're taught from a young age that effort equals value. So a solution that requires less effort can feel like, well, cheating. It doesn't feel earned. We'd rather choose a complicated, difficult path because it aligns with our belief that hard work is the only way to get results.
So you've got overthinking, you've got ego, and you've got this deep-seated belief that things should be hard. It's a perfect storm for missing what's right in front of your nose.
It really is. And this brings us perfectly to our first big example. The first non-obvious truth, and it's in the realm of success. And it's a storm that we're often not even aware we're in. This social conditioning runs so deep. Think about school. We're rewarded for the A on the test we studied weeks for, not the A on the test that came easily to us. The system teaches us that struggle is a prerequisite for reward.
Let's talk about it. What is the simple, obvious, yet ignored truth about success?
Okay, so logically, everyone knows that consistency is more important than talent or intensity. We've all heard the phrase, slow and steady wins the race. It's a cliche for a reason.
Of course, we know it, but our behavior tells a completely different story. We're obsessed with talent. We glorify the prodigy, the overnight success, the person who seems to achieve greatness effortlessly.
Exactly. We look for the magic bullet, the one big break, the hack. We buy the gym membership on January 1st and go hard for 2 weeks, then burn out. We start a business and expect it to be profitable in 3 months. We're addicted to intensity, not consistency.
And why is that? Why do we consciously know consistency works, but subconsciously chase intensity?
Because consistency is, oh, it's boring. It's not sexy. It's doing the same small, unglamorous things every single day, even when you don't feel like it. There's no big dopamine hit from writing 1 page of your book or making 5 sales calls or going for a 20-minute walk.
Right, the results are delayed. The feedback loop is incredibly long. Whereas a burst of intense effort gives you immediate gratification. You feel productive right now, even if it's completely unsustainable.
That's it. It's the difference between planting a seed and waiting for it to grow versus setting off a firework. The firework is spectacular, but then it's gone. The seed just sits there in the dirt for a while, but eventually it becomes a tree.
I love that analogy, and talent is the same. Talent is like starting the race 50 yards ahead of everyone else. It's a great advantage. But if the talented person jogs and the person with average ability sprints consistently day after day, the consistent person will eventually lap the talented one.
And we see this everywhere in sports, in business, in art. The greats are almost always the ones who just showed up more than anyone else. They mastered the boring fundamentals through sheer repetition. But we don't want to hear that. We want to hear they were born with a gift.
Because if they were born with it, it absolves us of the responsibility of having to do the boring, consistent work ourselves. It's a comfortable lie.
Whoa, yeah, that's deep. A comfortable lie. So true. And this pattern of choosing the more exciting but less effective path, it shows up big time in our second example, relationships. Think about the author who becomes a sensation with their debut novel. Everyone focuses on the book itself, the perceived talent, but they ignore the decade of writing mediocre short stories, the hundreds of rejection slips, the daily habit of writing 500 words, good or bad. The consistency is invisible, so we attribute the success to the visible talent.
Yes, let's talk about the magnetic pull of the emotionally unavailable person.
Okay, so on paper, what does everyone say they want in a partner? Someone who is kind, reliable, communicates well, is emotionally available?
The nice person, the stable choice. It's the obvious answer.
Right, but then who do we often find ourselves obsessing over? The person who is a little distant, unpredictable, who keeps us guessing, the person who gives us crumbs of affection and makes us work for it.
It's a pattern as old as time, and it makes no logical sense. Why would we be drawn to someone who is clearly not going to meet our emotional needs?
Because it's not about logic, it's about psychology. And it's actually very similar to the consistency versus intensity thing. The stable, available person offers consistent affection. It's predictable, it's calm.
Which again can feel boring.
Yes! Meanwhile, the unavailable person creates a dynamic of intermittent reinforcement. It's the same principle that makes slot machines so addictive. You pull the lever, you get nothing. Nothing, nothing, then suddenly a small win, a nice text message, a moment of connection. You get a huge dopamine rush.
And that high is so much more powerful than the steady, gentle warmth from the reliable person. Your brain gets hooked on the highs and lows, the drama, the chase.
There's also an ego component here, too. If we can win over the person who seems distant and unattainable, it feels like a major accomplishment. It validates our worth. We think, if I can get this person to finally commit, it must mean I'm special.
So you're not even really in a relationship with the person. You're in a relationship with the challenge, the project of trying to change them. And it creates a paradox. We crave the stability and security that a healthy relationship provides, yet we are drawn to the very things that undermine it. It's because our brains mistake the anxiety and uncertainty for passion and excitement. The roller coaster feels more alive than the gentle walk in the park, even if the roller coaster makes you sick.
100%. The obvious truth is to choose the person who shows up for you consistently. The non-obvious but powerful drive is to chase the intermittent reward and the ego validation.
And this pattern, once again, leads us to our third area, which is money, because the same faulty logic applies.
It really does. Let's frame it. What's the common financial advice you hear everywhere?
Oh, it's all about saving. Cut your expenses, stop buying lattes, make a budget, clip coupons. It's a defensive mindset. It's about scarcity.
And look, saving money is important. We're not saying it's not, but there's a mathematical limit to how much you can save. You can only cut your expenses to zero.
Right. Whereas on the other side of the equation, there's no mathematical limit to how much you can earn. Your earning potential is theoretically infinite.
So why then does almost all mainstream financial advice focus on the limited side of the equation, saving, and not the unlimited side, earning?
Because saving feels safe. It's about control and certainty. You know that if you don't spend $5 on a coffee, you will have $5 more in your account. It's a guaranteed immediate result.
Earning, on the other hand, that's scary. It involves risk. It means asking for a raise and maybe getting rejected. It means starting a side hustle that might not pay off. It is uncertain.
It's playing offense instead of defense, and most people are psychologically wired to play defense. It goes back to loss aversion. The pain of losing is about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. So we'd rather avoid the potential loss or rejection that comes with trying to earn more, and stick with a safe strategy of saving more.
Even though, logically, the person who focuses on increasing their income will almost always end up in a better financial position than the person who only focuses on cutting their costs. It's the obvious path to wealth, but we ignore it because it's emotionally uncomfortable.
And that word right there, Maria, uncomfortable, I think that's the key that ties all three of our examples together.
Yes, let's talk about the hidden pattern here. We've talked about success, relationships, money, and in every case, the obvious solution is ignored. Why? It's not because the obvious solution is complex. In fact, it's always the simpler one.
It's simpler, so what's the common thread?
The common thread is that humans are not wired to avoid complexity. We are wired to avoid discomfort.
Say that again. That's it.
We don't avoid things because they are hard to understand. We avoid them because they are hard to feel.
Exactly. Let's break it down. Consistency in your goals, that requires confronting the discomfort of boredom and delayed gratification.
Choosing an emotionally available partner, that requires the discomfort of vulnerability and letting go of the ego-driven chase.
Focusing on earning more money, that requires the discomfort of potential failure, rejection, and stepping into the unknown.
In every case, we choose the more complicated, less effective path, not because we don't understand the simple one, but because the simple path leads through a valley of emotional discomfort. We'd rather take a complex 10-mile detour around the mountain than face the simple but steep 1-mile climb over it.
That detour is where we live our lives, in complexity and distraction, because it protects us from feeling bored or vulnerable or scared.
And this is so critical to understand because it's how we get and stay stuck.
Let's talk about that. How does this subconscious avoidance of discomfort keep people stuck for years or even decades?
It creates what you might call an identity loop. We build an entire identity around the complex detours we take.
What do you mean by that? An identity loop?
Okay, for example, instead of doing the simple, uncomfortable work of consistent daily effort, you create an identity as a big ideas person who is always planning and researching but never executing. The planning becomes the work because it's comfortable.
Right, or instead of facing the vulnerability of a stable relationship, you build an identity as someone who is too passionate or misunderstood, someone who thrives in the drama of unstable connection.
Exactly. And instead of taking the risk to earn more, you become the frugal guru, someone whose identity is wrapped up in saving money and finding deals. It's a source of pride.
And these identities are so insidious because they feel good. They protect our ego. They give us a story to tell ourselves and others that justifies why we aren't taking the simple, direct, and uncomfortable path.
It's a form of self-sabotage that masquerades as a personality trait. And breaking that loop is terrifying because it means you have to let go of a core part of who you think you are. You have to admit that your identity was built around an avoidance strategy.
That's a huge step, and it requires confronting all that discomfort you've been avoiding. So the question becomes, how do you even start? How do you begin to see the simple truths you've been conditioned to ignore?
I think the first step is a mindset shift. You have to start actively looking for the simple, boring solution. Train yourself to be suspicious of complexity. When you're facing a problem, ask yourself, what if this were simple? What would the boring, unsexy solution look like?
I like that. Actively hunt for the boring answer. What else?
Another powerful technique is to follow the feeling of resistance. Pay attention to what you're avoiding. That feeling of, I know I should do this, but I really don't want to. That is a giant flashing neon sign pointing directly at the most important work you need to do.
Lean into the cringe.
Yes, lean into the cringe. The thing you procrastinate on is almost always the simple, uncomfortable action that will unlock the most progress. That having the difficult conversation, making that first sales call, writing that first paragraph. Your resistance is a compass.
That's a powerful reframe. Instead of seeing resistance as a signal to stop, see it as a signal to start. A third idea is to invert your thinking. Instead of asking, how can I succeed, ask, how could I guarantee I will fail?
Oh, interesting. How does that work?
Well, if you wanted to guarantee you'd be unhealthy, what would you do? You'd eat junk food, never exercise, sleep poorly. To guarantee failure in business, you'd never talk to customers, have a terrible product, and be inconsistent. Often, the answers to how to fail are glaringly obvious. And once you list them, the path to success is simple. Just don't do those things. Avoid the obvious path to failure.
It cuts through the noise and shows you the critical few actions that really matter. I love that. So we're hunting for the boring solution, following our resistance, and inverting the problem. These are all ways to start peeling back the layers of complexity we build around ourselves.
And as we start to wrap up, let's bring this all home. We've talked about how hindsight bias makes things seem obvious, how we ignore simple truths because of discomfort, and how this keeps us stuck in identity loops.
Right. The big takeaway is that the most profound changes in our lives don't come from discovering some secret, complex piece of information. They come from finally having the courage to do the simple thing we've known we should be doing all along.
The work isn't intellectual, it's emotional. It's about developing a tolerance for the discomfort of boredom, vulnerability, and uncertainty.
Which leads us to our final challenge for everyone listening. We want you to really sit with this question for the rest of the day or even the week.
Here it is. Ask yourself honestly, what in your life feels obvious, but you're still not doing it?
What is that simple, boring, uncomfortable action that you know would change everything if you just did it consistently? Is it going to bed earlier? Is it starting that project? Is it making that apology?
Don't look for a complicated answer. Look for the obvious one, the one that makes you feel that little twinge of resistance, because that's where your breakthrough is waiting.
That's all for this episode of The Behavior Code. I'm Maria.
And I'm Gabriel. Thanks for listening. Go do the not obvious thing.